concerns have been raised about the return of alcohol-related issues, such as driving under the influence. Now, the lockdown booze ban has seen a drop in medical emergencies, in general trauma, road accidents and in domestic abuse. But questions are being raised about policing intoxication, for example, when breathalyzer tests can be used and how traffic fines will be implemented during the lockdown period. For more on this story, we're joined now on the line by traffic law expert Alta Swanepoel. Alta, thanks very much for your time on the AM report. So this lifting of the ban on alcohol, it brings a whole new set of challenges when it comes to traffic law enforcement. I think the roads have been very empty since the lockdown began. We know that come Monday, the curfew will also be lifted, so we're likely to see a lot more South Africans driving on the streets of the country. What are some of the biggest challenges for you that come up?
Well, I think one of the things that obviously distorts the whole process is that the people were not drinking, but they were also not driving. So to link up the statistics is a little challenging. We simply didn't have vehicles on the road. So the number of guys who were drinking and driving were also not there because nobody was allowed to be on the road at all, whether they were drinking or not. During the lockdown, you must also remember that lots of people did stock up on alcohol before the lockdown started. So there have been people that have been caught for drinking and driving during this process, for speeding, for all the other traffic offences that were out there. There were just less of them simply because they were not allowed on roads.
One of the other big questions is around what you can be forced to do during this period. I mean, dealing with people who might be intoxicated on the road during a pandemic is likely to present its own difficulties. Can you be forced to take a breathalyzer test during this period? And can officials themselves, who are on the receiving end of someone blowing particles out of their mouths, essentially, say that they don't want to partake in that? I mean, are they legally protected if that's the position they take?
Well, in terms of the legislation, nothing there has changed. The rules for the pandemic has not changed as far as the drinking and driving is concerned. So forcing a person to do a breathalyzer test or to be subjected to a blood alcohol test, because in many areas in the country we still they do the breathalyzer test as far as the screening device is concerned, but to do the actual legal test, they have to take them for a blood test. That has been in place all along. That has not been changed at all. As far as the officials that are conducting the tests, the equipment that is used is actually it's of such a nature that the person is not blowing into the official's face or anything like that. There is a specific type of equipment, a mouthpiece that they have to blow into, which is a contained scenario. But I assume there may be officials that would be concerned about something like that. However, the pandemic has not changed any of that legislation. It has been throughout the entire period of 8 weeks. That law has been in place as it's always been, and the law enforcement officials who are entitled to do law enforcement on this may actually force you to blow into that equipment. It is an offence not to do so.
Yeah, I mean, I hear your assurances about perhaps how the equipment itself doesn't pose a risk, but what happens, for instance, if a motorist generally doesn't feel safe using some of the breathalyzers that sometimes we're forced to do? I mean, can, on the basis of safety, one push back against this, this measure, for lack of a better term, really?
Well, I assume if you argue that you do not want to use the equipment because you feel it's been used by someone else or something like that, there's been arguments like that in the past. The equipment, there's a set of standards that have to be used when a person blows into equipment. Mouthpieces are sealed. They have to use a new mouthpiece for every person. But if you have an official that is not doing something like that and a person refuses, generally they would be arrested and they would be taken to a police station and then taken to a doctor for a blood test if they refuse to do a breath test. You can't literally force a person to do a breath test. With blood tests, there has been cases in the past where a person has actually been held down and a doctor actually draws the blood. With a breath test, if you don't cooperate, they do not get the breath out of your system to be able to analyze it. So under those circumstances, they would have to arrest you and take you for a blood test.
And one of the other issues is the fact that once testing centers and licensing centers open again, the department is going to be faced with an incredible amount of backlog issues. And this is an opportunity for a whole lot of gathering, etc., which in turn may in fact lead to a spike in the spread of the virus. On that basis, I mean, if one's license has expired, but they fear that, you know, being in that sort of environment now at least might put them at risk, I mean, are those the kind of arguments they can make to try and stave off whatever ramifications come off having an expired license during this period?
For that reason, government has actually changed their stance on this, because initially there was only a 30-day period of grace once the lockdown ended. And as the time went by and the lockdown period extended, the government realized, but now the knock-on effect is actually such that you simply cannot catch up 3 months worth of rear licenses and driving licenses in 1 month. So the government gazette that came out a week ago has got a 90-day period within which you can renew your license. The problem is just people have to notice that that only applies to people whose licenses, whether it's vehicle license or driving licenses, expired during lockdown. That is from 26 March up to the end of May. So if your license expired, for example, on 15 March, and you did not go and renew it in time, you would not be covered by the grace. You would need to go. However, as these facilities will also only be operating at 30% of their capacity, and they have to do the normal social distancing and everything, I assume many people will have to perhaps wait until 40, 50 days after the lockdown has ended with the traffic departments to go and renew their licenses, but they are covered for 90 days. So they basically have until, they've got June, July and August to go and renew their licenses. And it may be that if government sees that they can't play catch-up quick enough, that they may actually extend that period still further.
And I guess we'll have to wait and see if that happens indeed. Thanks very much for your time. I certainly appreciate your insights. Alta Swanepoel is, of course, a traffic law expert.